once we let go of that ego, things become an awful lot easier. It's impossible to motivate anyone unless you know what makes them tick. Success can be lots of small little milestones along the way. It can be breaking records, for the fastest sail change. It can be, baking the best bread in the galley. I mean, all of these things are success. Sometimes those moments are what define winning teams, because you're not worried about things that actually aren't that important.
As I think about your stories, and particularly the stories you've told today, I feel like there was the defining of the purpose that everybody could buy into.
A good leader, if they can bring those three elements together, I think you've got the formula to win.
There is no growth in comfort and no comfort in growth. Yet the big leaps are how careers are made and how businesses excel. So how do you master not knowing at all or feeling like an imposter? How do you have the conversations that lead to trust and, of course, excellence? How do you take charge of the things that you can control? How do you thrive outside your comfort zone? That's what this podcast is about. I'm your host, Wanda Wallace, and it's time to get out of your comfort zone. Welcome to the conversation. Sometimes I think we learn a lot, perhaps maybe even more, about leading a business team by really stepping outside the business world and looking at a successful sports team. So in sports, if you're going to win at the top level, then there are so many things that you have to do well beyond just the physical skills. And there's the building of the team. There's the building of the support network. There's the building of the team culture. There's the mental preparation for adversity. There's getting the right leadership model. There's a reason you're doing it. There's so many factors that go into a winning team or a winning performance. And I think the sports world is singularly focused. So I think they're really good insight for business leaders. So now let's admit, though, that not all sports teams require the same level of teaming. However, what we're talking about today is sailing, and sailing is a team sport for sure. So it's a great place to look at how those teams win or lose. And my guest today is uniquely qualified to speak to us about this. So Conrad Humphreys has raced around the world 3 times and faced some of the most challenging conditions on the planet. Now, I want you to remember, this is in a sailboat, literally going around the globe. And at just 26, he was selected to skipper an all-amateur team for the BT Global Challenge Round the World race, and he led his team to victory. We're going to talk a lot about there, some incredible stories and insights from that one. Then in 2004, he switched to single-handed sailing and took on really the Everest of ocean racing, which is called the Vendée Globe. And this is sailing single-handedly around the world. And as Conrad likes to say, more people have gone into space than have raced solo around the world. He went on to finish 7th overall, again with some incredible experiences and insights from that one. And then most recently, he decided to do in the UK for Channel 4 a program called Mutiny, where he was a skipper with a crew of 9 people, and they recreated the incredible voyage of Captain Bligh after the infamous mutiny on the Bounty with traditional navigation equipment, the same kind of meager rations they had, and just to see can they survive and navigate 4,000 miles across the South Pacific Ocean to create one of the greatest survival stories in British history. So Conrad, I think those 3, let alone all the other things that I know you do, make you a brilliant guest today to talk about what it takes to really lead and win with a team. So welcome.
Welcome. Well, thank you so much. I mean, it's lovely to join you after all these years. I think we were talking before, it was nearly 20 years maybe since we were up in London together. So
that's right. It's been a long time. Well, I followed your career remotely, but so anyway, I'm excited to talk about it. And I know some of the lessons and some of the experience you've had have been amazing. Let's start, though, with the BT Global Challenge. So an amazing experience and an incredible success, both as a sailor and as a captain. But set the stage for me. You have an all-amateur crew. Explain, just give us the background on this race.
Yeah, so there's 2 round-the-world races, although in fact there were 2 round-the-world races that specifically focused on giving people from all walks of life the chance to do their Everest, their personal sailing Everest. One was the Clipper race and one was the Global Challenge. And I was a young skipper, got through the selection process for the Global Challenge. So I inherited a group of 29 amateurs. Some of them had never spent any time at sea before. A real mix of ability, mixed crew in terms of diversity. We had 8 females in that team, so not quite 50-50, but a large cohort of females. Not often that you have mixed teams in sport, and then on top of that, a huge age range. So the youngest was 18, just 18. The oldest was 60. So my job was to pull together this group of people over 5 weeks, make sure that they've got the right skills and training, but most importantly, get them into a 2-watch system that would then race around the world, and coach them, define their roles, give them responsibility, motivate them, and eventually we set off from Southampton on a 32,000-mile race around the world against the prevailing winds and currents, so into the big stormy seas in the Southern Ocean. Arguably one of the great leadership challenges. 2 leadership books have been written about this race, and our race in particular had a very big study done by Henley Management College about the skippers and what they did with each of their teams. So tremendous project.
Fascinating books, and I highly recommend both of them. Okay, so a crew of amateurs with a broad age range, and you're 26. And this means some of them were physically fit, some of them were not physically fit, I'm presuming?
Yeah, I mean, crikey, one guy, the oldest guy on the boat, Tiger Tim, he was diagnosed just prior to the race with a medical problem. He had to be put on warfarin, which is a blood thinning agent, and so we missed him for the first 2 legs, but he was someone that later on in the race would actually give me quite a lot of concern about his physical ability. Most of them were physically fit. Che, the creator of the race, Che Bly, he didn't want there to be barriers to sailing. He really was one of the guys that sort of broke down this sort of elitist attitude to the sport, and said, look, as long as you are reasonably fit, and you've got the the wherewithal to pass and get through a simple selection, we can get you around the world. And my job wasn't to deselect or get rid of people. It was to take what I've got and get on with it, and that's a great leadership opportunity when you're not sort of hiring and firing. You're just dealing with what you've been dealt with.
Yeah, and I want to reiterate, you had 0 say in who was on your crew. They were your crew. That was it. You were racing against other captains who were much older than you. How many other boats in this race?
So total of 12 teams, 12 identical teams. I didn't select my crew, so I inherited a crew, and all the crews were recruited or selected by the training skippers to be equal, because at the end of the day, the boats, the crew were picked out of a hat. So you could have got any crew for that race, and they could have got any skipper for that race. I know that a lot of the training skippers, some of which were selected to do the race, were the favourites. Everyone wanted to be with a training skipper. I was an outsider. People didn't know who I was, although I had done one round the world race with a Ukrainian team a few years before that. But I was an outsider, and so some of my crew, I think at the beginning, were a bit disappointed they hadn't got their favourite training skipper, but I don't think they were disappointed by the end.
I think not. All right, so there are many parts of this story I want to talk about, but I want to start with one of your highlights, which is this notion of a shared model of leadership. Now, particularly with a captain on a boat, we don't really think about shared leadership. So explain what you did and why you did it.
Yeah, so there's 2 big reasons, really. I mean, the first one was that, the sort of way these races are set up, there's one professional skipper that's employed by the challenge business, and then everybody else, your crew are paying crew volunteers. And so a lot of skippers think, okay, I'm in charge, I'm responsible, I'm the navigator, I'm the professional, and I just figured that things weren't working in those early days. The training, there was always a bit of an imbalance in the watch system. So I'm deciding, watch leaders who are going to be responsible for sort of managing each of the watches. But I always found myself tending to be on one side of a watch, or there was one stronger person who was great at managing people, perhaps one who was a bit more tactical. And so I just found that the balance wasn't right. And in fact, right up until the last minute, I still stuck with the sort of, I'm in charge sort of single leadership model. And then about 2 weeks before the start, I was just realizing that it wasn't working. And so I decided to pull actually the youngest guy on the boat, a young, stubborn Irishman who was actually tactically very strong, but probably not the best people manager. He was more of he was a great number two, and I made him into a co-skipper. And then I just evened up the watches and made sure the watch leaders were really focused on just getting the best out of their watches. They were really good people managers. I didn't get it right first time. The first leg, one of the watch leaders I didn't select at the beginning, because when we were sort of working out the way we were going to operate, he said to me, winning is not important to me, Conrad. I just want to have a good time. And that really just stuck in my head, that I thought, maybe he's not going to make the best watch leader because he won't be really focused on performance. And I was wrong. I was absolutely wrong. After the first leg, the guy that I had put in charge was tired, was, not feeling very well. The stress of the pressure of it was really undermining his confidence. And so after that first leg to Boston, I got it right. And after that, never really looked back. The young Irishman, Cian McCarthy, who joined me as a co-skipper, he just was so confident and never felt the need to wake me for a decision. I think there's nothing better as a leader than when your team wakes you up after a good sleep and they say, we just made this tactical decision and we gained 20 miles on the fleet. That is really what leadership is about, in my view.
Yeah. I think we're afraid as leaders to think about a shared model of leadership. And it's not like you turn over every decision to your co-captain or your co-leader, but you can allow some decisions to be made, because what it does is take the pressure off of you. It allows you moments to rest, in your case, because you're at sea for a long period of time in each of these legs. So you're staying sharp. You're staying, it's kind of stress is managed. But it also allows you to pull back a moment and do an analysis for how is this working? What are we doing? What's ahead? Just to do some thinking, some strategizing. And I just think we don't look at that nearly enough.
I couldn't agree more. I think shared leadership models are really, really healthy. They prevent sometimes, this sort of almost ego view of the world where, you feel that you've got to rubber stamp every decision. And you don't. Leaders don't also need to have all the skills. A shared structure, a shared leadership structure allows you to really empower people with the skills that you don't have. And I think, once we let go of that sort of that I guess that ego, that sort of responsibility that I have to be in charge all of the time, things become an awful lot easier. And that's where I think the shared structure, where you've got people really empowered, understand exactly what we're trying to do, where we're trying to get to, and taking responsibility without the need to sort of get rubber stamped all the time. And that's I think I look around at families and organizations and teams, and those are the most successful teams when they all feel empowered to deliver the result.
Well, where they have a role, we know what the role is, we know what the boundary conditions are for that role. I mean, it's wonderful. And music to my ears, because that is the subject of Out of the Comfort Zone and the subject of You Can't Know It All, the book, which is you do not know everything. You don't have to know everything, but you do have to lead people and select people who do. All right. I know also one of the things, having heard you talk about it, having read the book, our personal communications, is that you spend a lot of time getting the culture, quote, right for this team. And I remember one of them is getting people to decide, could they live without a family photograph or not? Tell me about all the things that you did to get the team bound together and committed as a team.
So we had an initial weekend together after we'd been selected down in my patch of the world down in Devon, and it was really a chance to sort of sit down and get to know each other. I always say that it's impossible to motivate anyone unless you know what makes them tick, and getting to really understand what people are about, who their families are, what's important to them, what are they trying to achieve outside of this bubble that we're in the sailing world. I think I made more notes during that weekend about people than ever in my life, and that went on to be a real key ingredient. I've got those notebooks on people, how they respond during difficult times, how what their children's names are, what their parents' names are, and so on. It's all those little things which just help you in times of duress to really know what makes them tick and how I can get the best out of that person. So then we sat down and just looked and talked a lot about our values and the culture. I call the culture the way we operate. This is the way we're going to get things done, and that's from in every maneuver on the boat through to the way we turn up to meetings on time. It's attitude, it's culture, but it's our operating guide really. And so once we've kind of got the values and the way we operate right, the next thing was really to sort of say, okay, well, what does success look like for us? And there was this huge moment where I wanted to talk about the ability of creating a team that could win the race. But I sensed a bit of is that our mission to win the race? That sounds a bit too brash, a bit too bold. There's 11 other teams that could also win the race. And so this notion of fulfillment was really important. And I now talk about belonging, which I know we're going to come on to, but fulfillment was a key ingredient. And so in the end, our sort of mission statement, if you like, was to do all that we can to win the race and feel fulfilled.
Okay. I love that. I know that there was at least one and probably more who were in this race for the experience of doing the race, not for winning. I also know you well enough to know that you wanted to win with every ounce of your being. So you have this mission that's a little bit of a compromise. So how did that work out?
Well, success breeds success. And so everyone, I think, likes a little taste of winning. And I've never met anyone that hasn't loved that feeling of success. I counter that, there's no one on this planet that doesn't, once they've had a little bit of success, enjoys that feeling. And so that was one key thing, is that success can be lots of small little milestones along the way. It can be winning legs, it can be breaking records for the fastest sail change, it can be baking the best bread in the galley. I mean, all of these things are success. And actually, once you've got a culture of success, where it feels like we can improve every single day, then you get that winning feeling. And we just celebrated our 25th anniversary just last November. 25 years on, and that's competitive kind of sense of being the best is still there with these, all of these crew, and we're all a little bit older and wiser, but you can still see that hunger for success is still there.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And I love 25 years later, the camaraderie of the team is as strong as it was even at the end of the race. Okay, I know in the analysis you were doing to say, how do we win this race, even if that's not going to be front and center on everybody's mind, you sort of put a metric on absolutely everything that could be measured. And one of those had to do with the weight. And you talk about this need of, are we going to carry an extra 15 grams of sugar or not? So talk me through how that played out in the crew and how that worked.
Yeah, the weighted factor analysis, we called it. I had this young engineer, I mean, he was a little bit older than me, let's say young, working for a railway company called Railtrack, and he was a risk analyst, and he came to me with this incredible sort of notion, really, where he said, I want you to describe every single thing that is important in terms of success, every single detail, and then together, I'd like to create this sort of almost like a mind map, a weighted factor where we try and give something a weight to help us sort of prioritize decision making, because we obviously can't do everything. And in the end, this sort of spider diagram had everything from literally, should we take pictures of mum and dad, do we carry a pillow because it helps you sleep, do we save weight in lots of different ways. And in the end, this weighted factor analysis, yes, it helped us prioritize, but it also showed me that absolutely everything will make a difference. Because sometimes with these races, you finish minutes and seconds apart over a 30-day leg. Actually, an extra few grams of sugar probably has made a difference. And so, whilst we didn't need to, go into absolutely every detail, every minutiae, what culturally did was made people realize that actually everything does make a difference. And that was really comes back to culture and the way we're going to operate. Actually, if everything we do makes a difference, let's just do everything to the best of our ability.
Right. And allowing people to make personal trade-offs in that moment. It's like, I will give up my pillow if I can have my 2 grams of sugar extra, or whatever it is, that people feel like some agency in that one as well.
Absolutely. And I'll give you another great story. We left Boston. We're sailing from Boston south to the equator to Buenos Aires. And there we are. We've got the choice. You can take a pair of boots, a pair of shoes, but not both. And that was I said, you can take shoes or boots. If you take boots, yep, the first few days they're going to be perfect, but across the equator, they're probably going to be a bit hot. All of my crew decided that we would take boots, and that's all. And as we walked down the dock, a few of the other teams were looking at us going, and it was really hot in Boston that day, and they were sort of in their flip-flops. Some crews were in trainers. They had all different types of shoe on. And they looked at us, and one of the skippers said, do you know something we don't, Conrad? Because we were all there in our Southern Ocean boots. And I just sort of smiled. But I could imagine a week in the conversation, one crew member saying, looking up, to the watch above, oh, what footwear do we need? Is it boots or flip-flops or shoes or trainers? Whereas we didn't have to make that decision because it was boots or boots. And so that split second of discussion never never happened on our boat. And I think, you know, sometimes those moments are what define winning teams, because you're not worried about things that actually aren't that important. You know, yes, going across the equator, we might kick our boots off and have our pinkies out in the sun, but we'll always put them back on when we need to do a job.
Right. When I listen to these stories, Conrad, I get the sense that, yes, you're in charge, you know you're in charge, but you know how to share leadership. That you have an incredibly complex and complete model of all the little things that will make a difference in winning by the seconds and minutes that each leg is going to happen. That knowledge is shared among everybody so that they know the implications, they know the consequences, and they can sort of weigh in on what they want and how they want it. We're back to shared model of leadership. We have an understanding of what it takes to motivate each person, particularly in stressful times, because you've invested the time in it. And we have a strong sense of why we're doing this in a way that actually accommodates everybody's personal reason for doing it, not rubber stamp from the top that says, here, we will all get on board for doing this for what Conrad wants. That sense creates real buy-in, to use an old, overused word, for what we're doing, why we're doing, the decisions we're making, and what the implications are.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, there were times when, we didn't. Not everyone bought in. You know, that's clear. And in fact, one of my crew members, I remember, you know, he was quite antagonistic about some of those early decisions we'd make about things like, particularly around clothing, around some of the safety kit and so on. And I used to think this guy was so important to our team because he was the only one who had the courage to stand up and say, you know what, I'm not sure I go along with that. And you can have, quite often in organizations, lots of people who, are caught up in the moment, who just yeah, whatever Conrad says, he's the guy, we understand where we're going. And I remember in some of those early meetings, my number two and one of the watches would turn to this guy and say, why do you always kind of, pull us up when we're all aligned? You're the one who's, saying no. And I would sort of, stop them in their tracks and say, no, it's super important to listen to this guy, because he's keeping us honest, keeping us real, and what he's got to say is really important. And actually, as the race went on, he became one of my most trusted lieutenants on the boat, because he always, gave me that slight counter argument that I needed, which just does keep leaders honest. I wish in certain organizations, I won't mention here without being too political, that there are a few more people to stand up and say, that isn't right.
I wish there were more leaders who would listen to the one or two that stand up and say, I don't agree. And they take the time to say why and what's that about, and am I missing something here? And maybe still go ahead with the same decision. But boy, do you get somebody who's willing to keep challenging exactly where you need challenging. Okay, I want to go backwards. Oh, no, before I do that, I want to say you have 4 things you think were really successful on this race and on other races. Just walk me through what each of those 4 are and why you think they're so important.
So I think when you're building anything of value, whether it's a team, an organization, your family, extraordinary results don't come from, strategy alone. They come from really, I would say, 3 things in the main. One is your purpose. Is the reason why your sort of your mission, your focus, the why you've come together. Teams without purpose lose focus. Organizations lose flow. Families drift apart without purpose. The second one, and we probably touched on this, is belonging. I think without belonging, really there is no purpose. Nothing endures or lasts without a sense of belonging. And it's really the glue that keeps a team together. It's the culture, it's the values, it's those things that we've been talking about. And the third thing is belief. And that is not only self-belief, because I think it's impossible to lead unless you're anchored within, but it's also the ability to inspire belief in others. And so that's where you could say it's four things, but belief, both self-belief and the ability to inspire belief. A good leader is if they can bring those three elements together, I think you've got the formula to win in everything. And that's in family, in organization, in life. And it's taken me maybe 20 years to really to get it to that point, because I've had other things, other senses, other things that I thought are important, but actually those three ingredients are critical to a successful team.
Right. We've talked about purpose. I love your statement that purpose gives you a point of focus. It gives you a sense of priorities. It gives you a sense of why we're doing what we're doing. And it probably sows the seeds for belonging. So we talked a little bit about that and about creating on this particular race a purpose, a mission statement that everybody could identify with. Belonging. We give a lot of lip service to belonging. I don't think we really appreciate how important it is in a team. So what did you, and I love that you say that's what helps you endure as a team. What did you do with this crew to create that sense of belonging? You said cultures and values. Was there anything else?
I think, it starts with your beliefs and your culture and your values, because those are the sort of critical building blocks to getting belonging right. I think there's a real humanistic element to this as well. It probably comes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We need to feel fulfilled. We need to feel loved. Those things, we need to be looked after, to have food. The basics sort of elements of life. And I think organizations that get those ingredients, those belonging elements right, they do go on and endure. And actually, in lots of industries, I've done some work in the television industry, and that's an industry where, once it's in the can, once it's shot, quite often the groups disseminate, they drift apart, they move on to other things. And there isn't that sort of, sense of endurance that comes with that. And a lot of the sort of culture in organizations, is to make money quickly, then we're going to float, or then we're going to exit after 5 years or 10 years or what it might be. It's very difficult to build any sense of belonging in organizations that operate that model. And I genuinely believe that we need businesses that think and feel, first and foremost, that they're there for their employees, and secondly, that they're going to be around for a long time. This is why I can't stand, our politics, this sort of short-term 5-year cycle. Whoever thought that was a sensible way to run anything? You wouldn't run a company in that way. You wouldn't run any organization with that sort of mindset. And so I'd love to see, the sort of organizations take take the understanding that we're going to put our people first and we're going to be around for a long time.
For a long time. Yeah. Yeah. As I think about your stories, and particularly the stories you've told today, I feel like there was the defining of the purpose that everybody could buy into. There was that first weekend where you took so many notes and really got to understand a bit about each person, and you're modeling that each person matters and I want to know your story and, commonality. There's a critic that you are very actively listening to, and you're making it clear to everybody else that you care about that critic's voice. That's another signal that everybody belongs and is part of this. There's the time you spend on the culture and on the values and on the how we work. And I even think this model about all the factors that make a difference helps everybody understand. So there's another sense of a belonging for there. And then, that you're going to really take care of people in this process. I think those are really strong, powerful ingredients. We don't often talk about that seriously. We often give belonging lip service, but not enough of how do I create that sense in everybody.
I couldn't agree more. Belonging is also people who understand really clearly where you're headed, and they have this self-belief that maybe that's been inspired by the group, by the fact that we can get through this, and so they feed off each other. I think I said at the beginning, teams that don't have purpose just drift, they lose focus, they drift apart. Families that don't have a clear purpose drift as well. And once you've got the belonging and the belief and the purpose, you really have something that will last and endure. And that's, I think, what the world needs and what people need.
I love that. I love that. And I love how the three of these, the purpose, the belonging, and the belief, the self-belief and the belief in others, kind of really do reinforce each other in a lovely, positive cycle. I can't leave this, though, with getting you to talk for a moment about what you do to inspire belief in others. I get how you get yourself grounded and believe that you can do it as a leader and stay grounded. How do you inspire that belief in others?
I think, I say, it starts with feeling and being anchored within. It's very difficult to inspire belief without really having that strong sense of belief in yourself. And then, I look at the where we're going, and what are the challenges that we're going to face to get to that utopia, that place where we all want to be, and then just allow yourself to imagine what it will be like when we cross that line, or when we arrive at that point, or we achieve that milestone. And the hairs will stand up on the back of your neck. That feeling, it might bring a smile on your face. It might bring a warmth, a sort of a sense of wow, that's really powerful. Well, then hold on to that, because we're going to be in moments of utter despair and difficulty along this route. But what you just felt is always going to be there whenever we achieve any of these steps. And I think that really, for me, is about what motivation, if you can inspire that belief that however difficult it might feel and how lost you might feel, that there's that warm feeling at the end that will make you feel, put a smile on your face, make you feel like you've really got somewhere. And actually, if you can do that with a group of people together, that's incredibly powerful. And that to me is how to inspire belief, really, and motivate people.
Great. I love that story. I can also imagine you talked about setting a small set of goals, like, can we change the sales at the fastest we've ever done it, or world record, or those small things also give you a taste of that sense of success that kind of keep building that feeling and the hope in that feeling. It's really good. All right, Conrad, Not to belabor this one too long, but I want to take up a couple minutes to talk about your Vendée Globe race. An incredibly grueling race. You are racing around the world in a small-ish boat, I might add, and you're by yourself. And I happen to know from this story that you faced some incredible obstacles and some moments, I can imagine, of despair. How did you keep yourself going? Because you don't have that team around you to pick you up. You don't have that shared leadership model. How did you keep yourself going when things like the rudder breaks in the middle of the ocean?
Well, I guess first of all, I should probably say the Vendée Globe is it's one of the holy grails of offshore sailing. I think there are four pinnacles in sailing. One will be the Olympic Games, one would be the ocean race, the Vendée Globe, and they're the sort of the key ingredients. The Vendée is not for everyone. To sail and set off single-handed around the world without any assistance, with the inability to stop anywhere other than the start and finish place, makes it a really unique event. And to date, it's a race that's been dominated by the French. It's like, for your listeners, the Tour de France of cycling. It's a very special, big French race. Nearly 75-80% of the population of France will follow this race avidly. There's been a few Americans in it, a few Germans, a few Brits. I think to date 12 Brits have completed the Vendée Globe, and I became the fifth to finish it. So it's quite a unique, small little club. In terms of I guess motivation to complete it, less than 50% of those that start will go on and finish the race. And that is because you deal with all sorts of problems, but you can't ask for help. You can't get outside assistance. So you've kind of got to be a bit of a jack of all trades. You've got to be have the ability to fix things, to repair the boat, and so on. I always say about the Vendée Globe that those that make the start line will probably go on and finish. And the reason I say that is actually, and it's a bit of a cliche, but getting to the start line of these races, you'll have more setbacks, more failures, more challenges than you will, in many ways, racing around the world. It's a great metaphor for life, really. And my journey to the start of the Vendée Globe was fraught with challenges. The biggest challenge was raising the money, because I needed to raise a couple of million US dollars. I actually secured Motorola as my main sponsor. That didn't always go easily. You have to learn to become a sport agent and negotiate high-level contracts. Not something that sailors are necessarily good at doing. But the journey there was sort of marred really with difficulty, with setback, with challenges, so that when I got to the start line, there was a huge relief at setting off on the race. And when I encountered a lot of difficulties during the Vendée, broken keel and broken generator, broken rudder, all sorts of problems, I absolutely felt like I had the grounding to go back and get through those, because of all the setbacks I'd had in the journey to get to the start line. And I think that's why setbacks and failure on your pathway are so important to building resilience and your character that will enable you to complete these great races.
Yeah, it's hard to know that you can. And if I come back to your sense of belief, that knowing of the feeling of finishing it, knowing the getting to the cross line, that hanging on to that is kind of a bit of a pull. But you got to know that there's still something in the tank I can pull on to fix one more thing that's broken on the boat, or one more leg I'm behind, or one more day I'm stalled and can't move, or whatever else it is that goes on. So in your personal case, Conrad, did you have like a motto that helped you get through it? Did you have, is there anything that was important for you for getting through those really difficult moments?
So I'll tell you two stories. The first one is that, like a lot of sports people, I'm incredibly driven, and that can be sometimes, quite a negative thing, because you have this sort of almost alter ego, this second voice in your head that's constantly never satisfied. It's driving you on. It's never rewarding you. And of course, when you're on your own, and I was on my own for 104 days, this negative voice that's constantly saying, you overslept today, or you didn't, you lost some miles against your competitors. Very rarely saying, well done, have an extra sugar in your tea because you did a good job today. And I had to learn how to do that, to give myself a pat on the back. But I remember when I broke my rudder, which was about on day 28 to day 29, so about a third of the race gone, just off Cape Town. And I was limped into Cape Town, had this broken rudder, and I remember this little piece of paper this child had given to me at the start of the race. And if I describe it, it had a picture of a globe. It said, to Conrad, I hope you have a good time. It's important to remember that I've put myself there, so I should at least enjoy it. And then it had this one word, sort of like a big finish banner, and it just said finish. And I remember when I was limping into Cape Town with this broken rudder, I found this piece of paper, and it said finish. And for the first time ever, I thought to myself, I didn't set out on this race just to finish. I wanted to do well. I wanted to get a top 10 result. But here I was now at the back of the fleet with a broken boat, not even sure that I wanted to rejoin the race because I was dead last, 500 miles behind the last place boat. But that finish mantra became the thing that I just knew I had to do. And actually, I was able to silence that negative voice in my head, learn to deal with it, and to humor it, and to tell it to bugger off at times, because now I had a new mission, and that was to finish. It was a really powerful moment, and I think in terms of the self-belief toolkit, whatever you want to call that was the moment where I learned to control my feelings and my drive, determination, to control my mind. And it was probably the most powerful lesson of my entire sailing experience, really.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Conrad, wow, so much here. That notion of being, all of us need to do a better job of recognizing that inner voice that is so critical and learning to manage it. As one psychologist I work with said, it's in your head, you're in control of it, not somebody else. So learning to get on top of that one, and to find when the thing you thought you were going for isn't right in front of you, but to find a thing that you are going to go for, like finishing, as opposed to I'm going to be in the top 10. I think it's a really powerful lesson for adversity in general. I also love the notions about the team, and I challenge everybody listening to this, if you're trying to get a team to achieve really strong results, I encourage you to go back and don't just do this with the lip service that we often do, but get the team really focused on what are we trying to accomplish and understanding all that it takes to get there. Make sure that people understand they have a strong sense of belonging. That's part of you understanding them understanding each other, having their roles to play, and being tied into that sense of purpose. And then it's down to you as a leader to both manage your own self-belief, your own grounding, as we've just been talking about, as well as inspire that belief in the team as a whole. Conrad, I don't think we get a better story than that one. So if somebody I should say, if you don't know, Conrad is a brilliant keynote speaker, highly recommended, and also a great workshop facilitator. Conrad, how should somebody find you if they're interested?
Well, the great wonders of social media. I'm pretty active on all those channels. So I've make some documentaries, have a website. So you can find me. Probably the best starting place is have a look through my own website, because a lot of my content and the things that I love and write about are there. But also I have a YouTube channel which people can dive in if they want to watch some of these races or see some of the journeys that I've been on. I've slowly started to really ramp things up there. And of course, if you're a business and you want to reach out, then you can find me on LinkedIn as well. So,
okay, fabulous. Well, great stories. More to come, I'm sure, no doubt. Conrad Humphreys, my guest for today. Join us next week for another episode in Getting Out of Your Comfort Zone. Check us out at YouTube channel at Out of the Comfort Pod. If you'd like to watch this, there will also be a couple of additional short clips there if you want to get just a taste. And by all means, send us a comment. We'd love to hear from you. Have any questions or reactions, outofthecomfortzone.com. We'll see you next week.